Good afternoon, everybody. So, we're nearly there. This is the final session of the afternoon. So, I'd like you to welcome Emma and Loretta from the University of Plymouth with Raising the Bar, Developing Digital Capabilities for Staff and Students. So, over to you guys.
Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you for persevering to the end of the day. My name's Emma Pennell. I'm a Senior Learning Technologist at the University of Plymouth. My colleague Loretta Cook, Digital Skills Developer. My main aim for the session is to not fall off this podium at any point. So if anyone sees me dangerously close to the edge, please give me a shout. So, a bit of background and rationale for the project that we're going to talk about today. And our work in digital capabilities has come from two different directions. In the Faculty of Business, where I'm based as a learning technologist, we did a digital literacy audit in 2016, which highlighted pockets of really good practice across the faculty, somewhere we wanted to kind of build it. And often the digital technology enthusiasts were where the good practice lay. So what we wanted to do was try and provide some support and resources to just get a more consistent approach across the faculty.
Okay, and at the same time there was a university-wide collaboration project, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with the idea of moving across from networked on-premise file space to SharePoint cloud resources. So the management and ownership of mainly SharePoint team sites, also there was OneDrive for Business for personal files, the shared team sites, the ownership was devolved down to teams in admin areas. So those were staff who were very, very busy doing their day-to-day sort of admin job. And suddenly they had this whole new set of skills to learn. So there was mandatory training for that. And while we were delivering the training, it became quite clear that there was a lack of consistent digital capabilities and confidence really among that group of staff. So they were very confident with how they used to work, but trying to get them to move to this new way of working for some of them was quite a struggle.
And just before we go into the kind of toolkits and the things that we developed, we decided to use PebblePad as the platform to build our toolkits on. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. It's an established e-portfolio system that we have at Plymouth. It was already being used for a number of kind of PDP, employability, graduate attributes initiatives, so it seemed like a good platform to build on. And similarly, it gave us opportunities to build in some interactivity, self-reflection, and places for evidence, and the ability for students and staff alike to share their work and digital capabilities with mentors or other tutors. So, just looking at what we actually did. So from the Faculty of Business perspective that I mentioned, we had some internal funding and had a project group that was formed. We wanted to look at all the digital capabilities frameworks that were available, didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We spent a lot of time doing that, and we stopped on the JISC updated digital capabilities framework and wanted to work with that at the sort of top level. So that was the framework we used, but primarily in both the learner and the teacher toolkits that you'll see, we based them on the JISC role profiles. So for anyone who hasn't seen the JISC role profiles, there's a screenshot just there, and they're very good, very detailed profiles for a number of different roles in higher education that give you descriptors of what you should be able to do as a digitally capable learner, teacher, learning technologist, a whole array. So we wanted to take those, contextualise them for Plymouth and life at Plymouth, and also build some interactivity and space for reflection and evidence within them.
So the next step for us, for professional services staff, was we developed a small project team to look at how we could help that group of staff. So we wanted to help them to identify the skills gaps, and also to then find the best way for them to learn and to improve their digital capabilities. So to try and point them to resources, training courses, and so on. So we then approached an admin team in our largest faculty, which is science and engineering, and asked if they would work with us. So we wanted to develop a proof of concept, but also wanted to make sure that we got the input from them. We wanted them to drive it really, not us to be telling them what skills they should have, so to try and find out what they needed to be able to do in their roles. We looked at what Emma's project team had done, and worked with them as well and tried to share ideas, and we really liked the way that they presented there. So what you'll see today is that we took a sort of consistent approach, but we also wanted it to be something that we developed that was going to be personal for admin professional services staff, for self-assessment, that they had to feel not threatened by it. We didn't want them to feel that their manager, supervisor would be checking up on them. It was something they could do by themselves. They would initially have their managers, supervisors advise them on what skills that they would need for their particular role, but then they would be able to complete it. There is another bit then that they can share that we'll come on to later on. So at the end of it, between us, there were 3 outputs. So 3 toolkits. There was the learner toolkit, a teacher toolkit, and a professional services toolkit. And we're going to do a demo today, a very short demo, to show you a sort of simulation of each of those. We're going to use screenshots for today, just in the interests of time. But if anyone wants a live demo, we're around sort of for the rest of the conference and happy to show anybody who wants one.
Super. So we'll start with the learner toolkit. And the project team within the Faculty of Business, we had the Associate Dean Teaching and Learning, we had a group of academics, we had some students that all kind of contributed to the structure and the building of the learner toolkit. When you go into it, so it's an interactive workbook within PebblePad, and basically across the top, that's the menu structure. So you can see anyone who's familiar with the JISC framework, we've kind of got digital learning, digital information and literacy, communication, well-being goes off the end of the slide. And so we kind of structured it around the JISC framework, and within the drop-downs for each one of them, you can see there's kind of subsections and themes within it. On the left-hand side, you've got the full structure and sort of hierarchy of the toolkit in its entirety. So the only thing that was slightly different to how the JISC role profile and capabilities was structured was that we have a time-bound section at the start. So we have a getting started section, which as you can see is first few weeks and end of the first semester. And the idea is the pages are all structured in a very similar way. We have a kind of checklist of can you do the following things? These are things you need to be able to do quite quickly. If you can't, at the bottom there is help, materials and guidance on how to do it. Because as well as this hopefully being a kind of embedded activity within curriculum or personal tutoring, we wanted it to be able to stand alone as well, so that students could pick up and use it. Oh, jumped ahead without me. So just to finish on the end of the first few weeks, as I say, checklist with supporting help materials. Semester 1, as I say, very similar, but more geared around things that they would do into the module a little bit more, so assessment, feedback, that kind of thing. For every section, we have a self-test, so we built some quizzes in H5P and embedded those in so that the students could do a self-check on what they'd seen in the other pages, and we built some extra feedback into the answers so that hopefully that would further help them in that particular area. The toolkit in its entirety is generic, and we wanted it to be that way so it could go across hopefully further than just our faculty. So we built, but we also wanted there to be a kind of discipline-specific element to it. So we created a program-specific page where the program teams could highlight, mind of its own, the program teams could highlight any technologies that were specific to accounting and finance or tourism that we didn't perhaps cover in the generic toolkit. So that was a way of kind of putting some discipline perspective on it. And just to show you a couple of the other areas, so in digital learning, what we still tried to do was align the particular practices or software with things that they might do while they're at the university, so aligning Office 365, can you do the following things for essays, project reports, etc. So the teacher toolkit, I'm not going to spend too long on this because there's some overlaps, and there is an earlier version of this on our website that you can have a look at if you're interested. Teacher toolkit was also based around the JISC role profiles. You'll see that it's structured in a very similar way. The teacher one, however, isn't checklist driven. It's resource driven, so that all of the sections are geared around the kind of working day, working pattern of an academic, the things that they might need to do. It's not to say we don't have checklists, it's just they're not front-ending it in the way that we do in the learner one. So basically it's kind of like working day, things that you need to know, section on key software for employees, so navigating our staff portals, just the example that I used there. As I mentioned, even though it's not sort of the front page of the teacher one, for every part of the teacher toolkit, we have an optional checklist and action plan. So if an academic wants to do a self sort of assessment, benchmarking, they've got an interactive checklist they can do that with, and there's also a action plan, which you'll see a bit more of in Loretta's demo.
So this is the front page of the Professional Services Toolkit. So when we developed it, as I say, we looked at what Emma's team had done. There wasn't a GISC role profile for professional services admin staff at that time. So we looked at adapting elements from other role profiles that fitted around the GISC framework to see if we could find something that would be useful. And the teams that we were working with, we met with them, demonstrated it to them, had some feedback. And after a while, we came to the conclusion with them that what would be more useful would be to develop something based on a staff member's journey through their employment at the university, starting with their induction and different stages of their induction, what they would need to learn during that first period, so that might be just the first couple of weeks, then through their probation, so that could be normally 6 months, sometimes it's a little bit longer. Then there would be ongoing development, and then there would be a space for role specific. So like for Emma's, they had specific, program specific, they asked for role specific. I'll come on to the other sections a little bit later on. These headings and all the skills within them, they were devised in conjunction with the team. So what we did was we had a workshop and we laid out in a big room lots of post-its with different skills that they had suggested and we came up with that they would need to know to be able to do their role, all the capabilities that they needed. Then we asked them to pick the post-its up, add new ones if they wanted to, put them up on flip charts grouped into groupings that made sense to them, and then come up with headings that made sense to them. So all of this was devised by them, and as we went through the project, we checked with them, they started using it, and then gave us feedback, and then rolled it out to more people. So we kept getting feedback till we came up with something in agreement with them that was useful to them. So very similar to the way that you've seen with the Learner Toolkit. During the induction period, the first one, you can see it's exactly the same checklist procedure that they go through. Here's the skills that they would need in the first part of their induction, in the getting started bit. So they tick the skills that they might already have. Anything they haven't got, they can then refer to the relevant resources on the same page. So in this example, for example, they might need to know about Windows, and if they look up to the different resources available, they're all numbered, and there are workshops, courses, self-paced learning, help guides, and useful links all there for them. So in this case, it takes them to LinkedIn Learning, and this was a collection, used to be in Linda, called Playlist, that was created to pull together the bits that were relevant to them. And also in different pages there are other resources. So as I said, it's like a one-stop shop. So they've got training courses, help guides, links on web pages, all grouped together in the relevant sections that they need. For somebody's probation, they would, for example, one of the sections is data security, so that's obviously critical for them. And we make sure that we keep it updated. So, for example, the most recent thing that came along was legislation for GDPR, and that obviously was something that needed to be added in there. It was mandatory training, so we made sure that very quickly we added that in, so that all staff, because we use PebblePad, as soon as we add it in, everybody's able to see it, and we have a page with all the latest updates in the toolkit, so they can see at a glance what we've added there as well. As I said, the role-specific section as well we've added. So as we've gone around and showed it to other teams, if they've come up with anything specific to them, we can add it in there. Also, people who've got very specific roles, for example, for finance responsibilities, and they need to use the finance system, and they can go to the link to Aggresso, which is the university finance system. The people that do the Aggresso training, we make sure that we liaise with them at regular intervals to make sure all of the resources are kept up to date. There's also on every page a report of broken link, and that's across all the toolkits. So anyone who finds anything that we don't find can report it back to us and we can get it fixed straight away. So the last section is something that we've added in from feedback from one of our workshops. And we had a section on recent technologies which included a chunk on emerging technologies. So things like that's been discussed today, Microsoft Teams, Microsoft Planner, that is around, but people aren't really using very much, but we want to make sure that staff are aware of it because it is something that potentially they will be able to use in the future or might be using more. So things like that we've put under emerging technologies, but also they asked for a quick page for people who may have worked in the university for 15 years that want to know what things they need to know, really important, what are the key skills, the most important things they need to know now to do their jobs. They may not necessarily want to go through every single section, so the things like the SharePoint team sites, the OneDrive for Business, all those things, Office 365 skills, Skype for Business we've put in there. On every page we have links to the personal action plan. So as I said, it's all personal to them. For professional services one, it's purely for self-assessment. But this bit of it is separate, but it's linked, and they can share it then if they wish with a manager, supervisor, or a mentor. So they can write on there anything that they might want to discuss that they could negotiate time, resources for, and they can have a discussion and then with their manager, mentor, and so on. It might be something as simple as shadowing a colleague, for example, it not necessarily going on a course. One of the things that came up was to have something there that they could indicate anything they might want to mark as a PDR objective, so that's the annual performance development review. And if there was something that they found that they thought this is something that I want my manager to be aware of to include in my next round of PDR and add as an objective, they could indicate that and let their manager know that as well. They can put in date spans or they can put in dates, that's entirely optional. And finally, as I said, it can be shared, but also they can, and it's entirely optional, ask for comments to be left on there if they wish as well.
Super. So just to have a quick look at some of the impacts from the Learner Toolkit. The top two of the most significant ones in that we didn't create any new resources for the Learner Toolkit. We literally went through the myriad of resources and help and guidance we already had and just better signposted it and put it thematically around the framework. So signposting to what we already had but was really hard to find. Raising student awareness of what the digital landscape, for want of a better phrase, looked like at Plymouth from as early on as we possibly could. That was really important as well and seemed to be effective in doing that. And the final two on there around, we think it's a really good thing that it has been able to be a standalone resource. So we have just launched this with modules and let students use it at their own pace. We've also seen really good examples of it embedded into whole semester or whole year modules, and also not embedded in modules and used with personal tutoring. So we've this academic year, we've had all of the first years in the Faculty of Business, about 550 roughly, use the toolkit in some capacity. So this year was our first big faculty-wide launch, if you like. A little bit of learner feedback when we've been talking to students, saying that in that first few weeks, overwhelmed with how many different systems they had to get to grips with quickly, so just knowing what they were and where they could find help for them was really useful. A really nice bit of feedback we had at an internal conference when we showed this just before we launched it. We had a third year student who was leaving the university that summer, And he came up afterwards and said, he goes, I really wish we'd had a similar thing when I was here, because I was still finding things in the third year that I should have known about early on. So that was a really nice bit.
Similarly then, our impact as far as staff are concerned, this is all staff that have been using the Teach Toolkit and the professional services one. So it's used across faculties and teams. So we launched it last year, and so far we've got about 160 professional services admin staff using it across faculties, across library teams, and we've also got 40 plus academic staff using it at the moment as well. It's promoted to new managers, so there is a mandatory course for new managers. It's promoted through that as well now. So any new managers that come along, they get to see it and they can get added to it, and it gives them then a built-in induction program that they can use with their staff. So existing staff can also dip into it, check any skills gaps, assess their own training needs, and as I mentioned, it's a one-stop shop, so it saves staff time. The optional action plan has been really popular, and that's quite widely used in one faculty. So the largest faculty, the sort of head of admin in that faculty has asked for all staff to be using it for the next round of PDRs. Similarly, the library are promoting it there for their teams to do the same. For staff feedback, I think the nice thing is people saying sometimes you just don't know what you don't know. It's really useful having everything in one place. I never knew that LinkedIn Learning even existed. As I said, it's ideal for all staff, and the structure and the list format they found really easy to follow. And as a manager, one person said, it's great, I don't need to worry anymore about spending ages creating an induction program when I get new staff members that join. In terms of moving forward, just to finish off the last couple of slides, in terms of ongoing evaluation, that's continuous and reviewing what we're doing. We also liaise with PebblePad, so any feedback we get, for example, things we've had ASTI's research function, and we really would like the links to be within the list, so people would have to scroll slightly less. We've passed that on to PebblePad, and also we're hoping to sort of wider and sort of implement it more widely, so try and roll it out to all staff and students.
Super, and just the last one to follow on from that, previously it's kind of been organic growth. We've done things at project levels and at faculty levels. From a strategic perspective now, we've had a new education and student experience strategy, and the digital capabilities is built into that strategy now, so hopefully the wider implementation that Loretta mentioned will be helped by the fact that it's kind of in our strategy documents now as well. Any questions? I managed to not fall off the stage, so winning.
Hang on.
How did you or what was the involvement of your human resources department in this?
To begin with, we spoke to them about it, of how we could go about it, and they gave us some ideas. And once we got up and running, then for the professional services one, our director went and spoke to their head, and that was when they wanted us then to do, they have this management module course, and they wanted us to do a module on digital capabilities and to build into that the toolkit, so that we could show it to managers to try and get them more involved. So,
was there already a sort of separate sort of staff development portal or site owned by HR? Were you in a green field, or were you kind of having to finesse your area?
there is an induction, a sort of university-wide induction program, if that's what you mean, and in probation, all of that, but there wasn't specifically digital capabilities built into it. Excuse me.
There's a question about the for the student module. So where you've created the content and it's is it compulsory for students, or how do you get students to do it if it's not?
In a mixture of different ways. It was deliberately designed not to have to be used in a particular way. So, and because this is the first time we've piloted it, we're now just evaluating the different ways it has been used. So we've had, at the start of our academic year for first years, there's a 4-week immersive module where they just do the same module and nothing else. We've had some academics who have embedded it into that module, so it becomes part of the sort of induction activities, if you like. We've had some people who just use it as personal tutoring, so the students are given it and then it's followed up in personal tutoring meetings, because that's got a continuity through the years. And we've had some where the students have just been given it as a self-development PDP type activity. So at the moment I can't tell you which one is the most effective. It's been used in probably 4 or 5 different ways. So now we're going to go back and have a look and talk to both staff and students. But I think our underpinning from the start of the project, we wanted something, because we haven't got an infinite resource to be able to do all of this kind of training or support with staff and students, was something that could be picked up and used in different ways. Hopefully there'll be a few ways that we can recommend as good practice. But yeah, so far the feedback's been okay on all of it.
Questions? Yep. We'll do one more and then we'll finish.
Sorry, I know we're keeping you now.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, what was the reason for using PebblePad? Is it just because it was used in
Basically,
other areas?
we'd already got we've got a workbook that's around the Plymouth Compass, which is our graduate attributes framework, and that was a kind of interactive workbook that students had all been given access to. A lot of other PDP type activities were done in PebblePad as well, and when we reviewed the role profiles, what we wanted to do was kind of have this checklist approach with the ability to have reflection. And I don't think I showed it on the slide on there, it may have just jumped ahead, but in the learner profile there's a page at the end of every section that's called My Profile, and basically within that, at the end of each year, there's a Likert scale of what is your skill level in this area, a reflective account, and a kind of action plan that the students do. And that's the bit that PebblePad is very good at, so we kind of wanted to use the tools that were familiar and we already had, and sort of cater to the things that we wanted to do. And that kind of, the My Profile bit is the bit that's been used a bit more, say formally, but if you wanted to assess something, that was the bit that was most appropriate.
And for professional services staff, they don't need to know how to use PebblePad. I just send them a link to it and sort of a couple of sides of instructions that we've now sort of uploaded onto our official document centre, a link to that, and off they go. And they come back with very few questions about it, they don't get stuck with it. It sort of opens their eyes that there is another piece of software there as well that they didn't know about.
But we know other platforms are available. We were just using the one that was kind of familiar and met the purpose of what we needed at the time. So.
Okay, can we say a big thank you to Loretta and Emma? So that's the end of today. You've made it through day 1, well done.